listener production.
Hey, it's Tara Cassidy with you and welcome to The Briefing. And we've got a special guest with us today, or do we?
Hello, Chris and Tara. This is the Prime Minister. Very happy to be on The Briefing.
No, we definitely don't, but to find out why you just heard AI Albo, stick around for the second half of this episode. First though, it's time for the headlines with Chris Spiru. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of April.
Morning, Tara. Morning, everybody. And morning, AI Albo. Happy Wednesday. From health to cost of living, the PM is expected to throw his support behind raising the minimum wage today in a move that could benefit 3 million Aussie workers. The government's expected to meet with the Fair Work Commission to recommend a real wage increase, so those are wages adjusted in line with inflation for the country's award and minimum wage workers. While it is just a recommendation and not binding, it does mark a shift from previous submissions where Labor had advocated for real wages to not go backwards. A note, the current national minimum wage is $24.10 an hour, much higher than when I was on minimum wage not too long ago.
Now, that's come after Albo spent the day campaigning in South Australia and then Victoria yesterday, announcing a $150 million medical centre upgrade in Adelaide South, a promise the coalition has since matched, as well as $5.5 million in facility upgrades for a netball club near the regional city of Geelong. Both seats are currently held by Labor, the South Australian one marginally. As for Peter Dutton, he hit Melbourne yesterday, kicking off the day at a winery in the city's north, where he announced his plan to cut $2.2 billion in federal funding from the suburban rail loop project, redirecting it to building an airport rail line instead.
It will bring Melbourne up to the same status as many of the great airports across the world, including here in Australia, that already have a rail link project.
Dutton was then off to southeast Melbourne, where he took part in a community roundtable on crime, and then the CBD, where he committed $3 million to a bone marrow research charity started by AFL legend Nick Riewoldt, whose sister Maddie died of complications of a bone marrow failure syndrome. All three stops were in non-coalition seats, Chris.
Yeah, and it's interesting that both leaders were in and around Melbourne yesterday. There are 8 seats in play in Victoria, and the state is really critical to the coalition if they want to get themselves elected and back into power, essentially. And importantly, while Dutton was in Melbourne yesterday, he had at top of mind just how unpopular Jacinta Allen, that's the state's premier, just how unpopular she is. That was really front of mind, and that was a lot of the talking points he was hitting. So interesting the commitments he's made in that space. Also, very briefly, before we go to the next headline, Peter Dutton earned himself a new nickname. He's gone from Timu Trump to Doji Dutton.
Today, he threatened cuts to school funding, which was right from the Doge playbook. This is Doji Dutton taking his cues, his instructions and his policies straight from the US in a way that will make Australians worse off.
Yeah, that was Treasurer Jim Chalmers speaking there. And that was on the back end of all these things that Dutton's been saying this week about education and ideology. And essentially, the coalition has not ruled out whether the Department of Education will be on the chopping block in these public service cuts that they want to make. But they did say if they are elected, they will be taking a closer look at the department, given our consistently low NAPLAN results and international rankings when it comes to things like numeracy and literacy.
And Chris, we have a debate day as well, I hear?
Yes, our first debate. Tune in to Sky, if you have Sky, next Tuesday night. That is where Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese will be going head-to-head.
And in your top-line crime headlines, US prosecutors are seeking the death penalty for Luigi Mangione, the 26-year-old accused of murdering United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in New York late last year. It comes after the Trump administration said it wanted to reprioritise capital punishment for serious criminals, with Mangione set to appear before a federal court in 2 weeks.
Back home, the victims of Sydney conwoman Melissa Caddick have had a win in their class action, settling for $3.5 million. Caddick posed as a financial advisor before defrauding 50 investors, many her own family and friends, of almost $23 million before vanishing in 2020 after she was raided by ASIC. She was ruled dead in 2023 after her severed foot washed up on a New South Wales beach.
And in Victoria, drug crime boss Tony Mokbel seeking a taste of freedom and requested bail as he appeals his convictions relating to lawyer ex-barrister turned informant Nicola Gobbo. The bail decision's been reserved for Friday, and if successful, it would be Mokbel's first time out of custody in 18 years.
And Australian police will be allowed to testify at the US trial of Arizona man Donald Day, who's accused of being linked to the Wambilla Christian terror attack in rural Queensland in 2022, which claimed the lives of 2 police officers, an innocent neighbour and the 3 killers. Day's accused of threatening public figures, the FBI and fueling the train trio's extremist ideology ahead of the fatal shooting. Now, look, there are a lot of crime stories we just mentioned there. We do have a bunch of deep dives on a lot of them. Head to the show notes for direct links to those episodes.
Changing pace now, and single women and same-sex couples are set to get some help paying for IVF. The Federal Health Department's planning to expand its definition of infertility so that more people can access related Medicare rebates, Chris.
Yeah, until now, infertility had been defined as people who couldn't conceive after a year of regular unprotected sex, which saw women using sperm donors or LGBTIQ plus couples excluded. It's being dubbed a significant step forward for modern-day families by leaders in the reproductive space.
Staying with health, and a Queensland man has become the first probable Japanese Encephalitis Virus death in the state since an Australian outbreak back in 2022. The North Queensland man was treated in Mackay last week but later died. Local health officials are unsure how the Bowen man became infected but say it's likely linked to his work, which required him to travel a lot. Health authorities are concerned that people's risk of being exposed to the virus could be higher right now due to recent flooding in the state's north. Now, if you want to hear more about Japanese encephalitis virus, I did do a deep dive on it last week if you scroll and search for Wednesday's ep on March 26, or again, check your show notes as well.
And the numbers are in. We hate our jobs. Okay, not all of us, and definitely not you and I, Tara Cassidy, for all our bosses listening this morning. Just a majority of millennial and Gen X workers, part of a SEEK survey of over 3,000 working Australians. So to break down the stats, 54% of millennials and 57% of Gen X. Interestingly as well, 52% of boomers and 40% of Gen Z workers reporting they have career regret, and if they had their time over again, they would pursue a different path in life.
And as to why, of those surveyed, just under half thought that they didn't get paid enough, and a third saying that their interests and passions have changed, while 28% citing poor work-life balance, Chris.
Yeah, I found it interesting that the stats were so high for Gen Z, like 40%. I'll be honest, we're quite new to the workforce. I mean, these are people who might have been working in their professions post-study or post-school for about 10 years now. So interesting that we're seeing the regret trickle in nice and early.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always thought about my career guidance counsellor at high school. She said that you're likely to change your career 7 times in your life.
Wow.
I think I'm on number 2 or 3 at the moment. So, I don't know, I've got 4 more to go.
Does that take into account like uni jobs, like when I was a retail worker or worked at a cafe, or are we talking like career? 7's a lot.
Yeah, those are great questions I don't have answers to this morning, Tara Cassidy. But hey, what I do have some answers towards, is something that we asked you, the briefers, yesterday on the back end of the premium increases for private health insurance. We asked you guys whether your premiums had gone up, and a bunch of you got in touch with us. First was Alana on Spotify. She said her HCF extras policy had only gone up 73 cents. So I'm assuming that is monthly.
Yeah, and then we heard also from Kylie, who said she was with AHM and that had gone up about $3.55 a week, so around $15 a month. But then it said that since actually signing up, that she believes it's gone up about $15 weekly. So that's a lot. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, and sticking with a lot, we got a DM from listener Anthony. He's copped a $19.29 increase a month.
Wow.
He's with HCF. He's on the silver package, so there's like bronze, silver, gold. We spoke about the gold one yesterday. So that takes his total to $280 a month, which is not insignificant at all.
No, definitely going to be taking up your advice about having a look at some other types of health insurance providers, I think, Chris, as I'm currently with HCF. Now, for today's deep dive topic, Chris, we all know that more than 80% of us spend a lot of time online, perusing the news, scrolling our socials. But because of that, it has never been easier for things like AI and deepfakes to reach us, even influence us. And now with an election on our doorstep, I wanted to find out if it's as big a threat as some people would have us believe. That's coming up next in today's Deep Dive. Can you tell the difference between what's real and fake online?
Of course I can, Tara.
Oh, Prime Minister, what are you doing here?
You put me here. I am 100% AI generated.
In just a few minutes, we've accessed a site, uploaded some audio of the PM speaking, and voila.
That's un-Australian.
That's enough from you, AI Albo. Tech and AI advancements mean it's getting harder to tell what's real and what's fake. And while such tools can be helpful and fun, they can also be used to create deep fakes or harnessed by lobbyists and politicians to influence us online. So as we approach a federal election, how much of what you see and hear can you actually trust? And could it sway us at the ballot box? Director of QUT's Digital Media Research Centre, Professor Daniel Angus, has researched misinformation and AI. Daniel, welcome to the briefing. Will AI influence our upcoming election?
Not as much as what some might want us to think, and that is possibly a good thing, but certainly AI technologies will play a role within the election in a variety of ways.
What ways are those?
The obvious one is in content creation. We know that the rollout of generative AI technologies now means that there are many, many ways in which we can create content, visual, so pictures and video content, even audio content and textual content using these tools. And so that might be used for a variety of campaign materials, including, ads, banners, leaflet materials, and other kinds of ways, even to press donors and sponsors as well to personalize messages. So we know that that has already happened in the year of elections. It was last year, and we'll probably see it in the lead up to this federal election here in Australia. So the use by candidates themselves, we can't rule out the potential use of AI technologies by bad actors. And so there may be some that will use it to create content that might try to confuse voters, mislead them in some way. But certainly I think that's the one that people will think mostly about is AI used for essentially content creation.
And there's been talk about for a long time, both locally and overseas, about AI elections and AI being weaponized to kind of undermine democracy. Why are you saying that it won't have as much of an influence as people say?
Look, the technology is not yet mature to a point where we're going to expect to see a really significant impact. And the worst I think we can do is allow the kind of AI bogeyman to take the focus away from the things that might genuinely negatively impact the security and the authenticity of our election in Australia that are already in play. And so personally, and given the research we do in the centre that I lead, I'm far more concerned about forms of domestic disinformation through astroturfing campaigns, through big, well-resourced, say, fossil fuel companies and other vested interests who are going to try to attempt to subvert democracy in this country to install leadership that they, would think are more sympathetic for their particular commercial ends.
And look, I've already seen AI on my own social media feed, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, those kinds of platforms. Where and when are we seeing it successfully used at the moment?
The kind of technologies we're probably talking about here are content generation tools. So things like your ChatGPTs and others to generate copy. So the idea of whether it's even something like as a script that a politician or a candidate might want to read out, a letter that they might distribute or a pamphlet, and then the advertising as well. We'll often see it also for the generation of images to make it easier for a candidate to generate an image, maybe to transpose their own likeness. So they might actually have an authentic photo of themselves and they might want to be positioned in a space with a favorable kind of backdrop of lots of willing voters smiling or something like that. That's the kind of thing that we might expect to see. The extent to which that is entirely negative or misleading, that's a bit questionable, right? I mean, this is just, I think, par for the course in terms of we've always seen the use of Photoshop and other kinds of technologies in any kind of campaign material. But I think that politicians need to disclose this. They need to disclose when they are using wholesale AI technologies to create completely fictitious scenes or individuals for that matter.
What about AI-generated videos? For example, there was one circulating of Anthony Albanese saying things that he'd never promised, and that can be quite concerning as we head into an election. Have you seen it used in that way by the political parties or even externally, whether it be user-generated content and that kind of thing?
A lot of the uses for where we're kind of having the likeness of a politician represented through an AI technology, more of the uses of that I've seen are purely for satire. And, we've always had satire within our political communication environment. And I think that's just part and parcel of the political communication landscape. Where we've got to be careful is those uses, particularly now with AI technologies, where it might not be clear to some audiences that this is genuinely satire, that they're not actually, saying these things. That's the concern I would have when information is kind of sliced out of those contexts, where it's very clear that this is for comedic or, satirical purposes, but then portions of that are taken and lifted and then say, replayed without and with that kind of context missing and absent from it, that might actually then kind of cross that line into deception and deceptive conduct.
There's been some reports that the coalition has engaged a firm that's known for using deepfake technology and embracing AI. They were previously used in the Queensland state election. There was a fake video of the Premier doing a TikTok dancing video. It was also used in 2019 when Scott Morrison won, as well as overseas. With voice clones and AI cheaper and easier than ever to access, what are the dangers here?
The real dangers here is when our traditional media sector pick these examples up and pretend that they are real when they are not. And so the real concern is this, what we call a two-step flow or a multi-step flow effect, where a lot of these campaigns are hoping that that material will be picked up by mainstream media and then amplified through that and create a controversy. And once that happens, then you've kind of lost the battle to begin with, because you're then debating the truthfulness of that content and you're already kind of off and being distracted from your campaign and your core message.
Have you got real examples of this? Yeah. I'm talking more about, say, the mainstream media actually making a mistake and mistaking a video as being true and then perpetuating that.
There's countless examples of this. Often this comes about with image stills, where you'll have images coming out of disaster areas and then the mainstream media recirculate them as if they are from that current disaster. So I saw some of these, for example, with the recent cyclone we had up here in Brisbane and southeast Queensland, of decontextualized images of previous natural disasters being circulated, boosted by mainstream media.
Yeah, wow. Okay. And what about in terms of, we know that Australians, up to 50% of people are getting their news predominantly on social media platforms nowadays. So what can we do about that? That doesn't fall to traditional media. That could just be content creators or AI bots. Like, what can we do there?
Yeah, so this is where regulation needs to catch up a little bit. And so we're seeing the beginnings of that. The AEC, have specific advice for the use of AI in elections. And that's really useful to look at to see how they're seeing this as an issue and it's kind of coming along. But again, it's not to be distracted that AI technologies are here and are having a hugely outsized role to play. There are many issues that we still have to contend with before we kind of get to the AI question that are genuinely having far more of a corrosive influence within our elections today. And that is the vested interests, big, multinational corporations that can set up, say, astroturfing campaigns like Mums for Nuclear, which is a astroturfing campaign set up by the nuclear lobby to try and make it look like there is more of a consensus for this than there really is. These are the things that we need to attend to, because AI can become a really useful distraction for those people that are getting away with these other forms of contemporary misinformation and misleading conduct, and a really useful distraction from the point, God, it's over there, AI, that's the real issue. But the regulation is coming, and that should also then fall on the social platforms to do more in this space, and also those vendors that are running and deploying the actual technologies in terms of the safeguards around how we can and can't use those technologies.
And look, as new and exciting and sometimes very helpful that AI can be to our day-to-day and getting rid of those mundane tasks, and I'm sure that we've all had a little look at ChatGPT for certain things, but is the Australian government doing anything to protect against the harmful sides associated with AI?
This is a really gnarly one because, like social media platforms, a lot of these are foreign operators. And so there's a complication here about how do you begin to regulate a foreign entity. And that's been obviously complicated in the recent months now, with the Trump administration largely tearing up its the previous attempts under the Biden administration to do similar kinds of things around AI guardrails. Instead, they've kind of flipped the other way and just kind of given the green light, and in fact giving away billions of dollars to AI vendors there to kind of just develop at a pace without any form of safety or regulation around them. And so that's Australia's challenge, is how it operates now in that kind of environment where we may have less impact in terms of foreign regulation, but what we can do is build domestic regulation here in maybe how it is deployed or used or picked up. And so some of the early kind of green shoots I see there are limitations around, for example, how certain technologies can be used in certain contexts. So the beginnings of those, ideas around what context are we going to be okay with this being used, and what does that use look like? And, what are those kinds of pieces of guidance we need to make sure that when they are deployed, they're deployed safely, but also in a way that's socially, that uplifts all of us, that doesn't, perpetuate bias and also doesn't kind of accelerate inequalities, for example.
Do you have any practical tips or tricks that our listeners might be able to take home in terms of how they could protect themselves a little bit against AI and spot it or, not be influenced by it?
Like within the context of an election, particularly, this seems paradoxical, but one of the easiest things you can do is actually in your socials, follow the politicians who are running and vying for your vote, because then you will see their organic content and you'll know what's them truthfully on the ground. The other thing is to, not take any one piece of media at face value, to really dig deep and to go underneath that and think about, hang on, is that right? Have I got a verified source for that? Do I recognize that source? And so that's another part of this. And then also appreciate that all media carries with it a particular kind of bias, and to be aware of that, of why they might be wanting to sell you a certain kind of message and what that looks like. That's Media Literacy 101, but unfortunately in this kind of environment, it's even more necessary to have those skills to protect ourselves.
Daniel, thanks for joining us once again on The Briefing.
No worries. Thank you so much.
That was AI and misinformation expert Professor Daniel Angus from QUT. Before we wrap this up though, we want to know what you think. Have you or someone you know been fooled by AI? Do we need to worry about it ahead of the election? Or do you, like Daniel, think there's bigger fish to fry? If you're listening on Spotify, you can leave us a comment. If you're on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review or flick us a DM on our socials at The Briefing Podcast. Don't forget, we'll be back in your feed with a fresh ep this arvo with Natasha Belling, and Chris Spiro and I will be back with you tomorrow morning. Until then, I'm Tara Cassidy. See you next time.
Listener.